Hi, everybody. Welcome to Big Joe's Journal. My name is Joe Tilden, and I am the host of this program. Well, this week we celebrate a traditional American feast, and that's the Feast of Thanksgiving. And something special about this year, that it is the 400th anniversary of when the Pilgrims arrived at what we now call Plymouth, Massachusetts. The Pilgrims were well, they were a branch of the Puritans. As you know, there were religious revolts going on all through Europe, primarily against Roman Catholicism. And King Henry VIII had decided he wanted to ditch wife number one and marry Anne Boleyn. And of course, as you know, he went through 6 wives, and his first wife went back to Spain. She was, her parents were the king and queen of Spain. But wives 2, 3, 4, and 5 all went on the chopping block. And I think wife number 6 outlived Henry. But the revolt was the fact that Henry couldn't get a divorce. The Pope refused to allow him to divorce his first wife. And so he took the church away from Rome, more or less, and established the Anglican Church. Well, there are a number of people in England that figured he didn't go far enough. They wanted to be totally rid of what they call Popism at that time. They call themselves the Puritans. They said they wanted to purify religion. And of course, since they weren't following in line the Anglican faith, things were made kind of rough for them. So they migrated, first of all, to Holland. But over a period of time, they became a little concerned about their kids growing up and getting away from English traditions and all the rest of it. And many of them were learning to speak Dutch, more so, which is a form of the German language. More so than English, and they were adopting Dutch customs, and they'd be a little concerned about this. So they returned to England, and they decided New World at that time was opening up. Jamestown had been established in 1607. The French had settled in Quebec City in 1608, and they decided, well, let's head to the New World. And so they were able to commission an old ship named the Mayflower, and they set sail from Plymouth, England. Well, in the year 1620, even though their destination was somewhere down around Virginia and the Carolinas, they actually wound up in what is now known as Plymouth, Massachusetts. And they went ashore, and they named the new colony after the community that they had left in England, Plymouth. And of course, those of you that have visited Plymouth, Massachusetts, I have, and you see the Plymouth Rock, and it's got 1620 carved into it, and it sets down a ways, and you wonder how they stepped on that rock and how they got up that high hill onto dry land. But the Mayflower landed at Plymouth, and once it had dislodged the what we call the Pilgrims, it returned to England. Well, when the Pilgrim Fathers landed there, tradition says they were greeted by the Indian chief. He said, "Welcome, Englishmen," which means that there had been English explorers had landed there a few years earlier, from whence the chief had learned to speak English. And they also brought with them, of course, the dreaded disease of smallpox, which had pretty well disseminated a lot of members of that particular tribe. But the Indians, Native Americans, they welcomed our Pilgrim Fathers. And they helped them through that first winter. They taught them how to farm, how to work the land, and everything else. So the following year, in 1621, the Pilgrim Fathers and our Native Americans sat down together and had a Thanksgiving dinner. And this was our traditional first Thanksgiving. That's why Thanksgiving commemoration, you see people going around dressed like the early pilgrims. And turkey is, if you will, is the meal of choice, mainly because at that time turkeys were rather plentiful in that area of Massachusetts. And they were easy hunting, so consequently they had big turkey dinner and all the rest of it. Well, of course, as you know, relations between the Indians and the Pilgrims soured over the year, and eventually they had a war, which the chief that had welcomed them to Plymouth was captured and beheaded, and his head was put on a stake in Plymouth Village. Well, this first delegation of Pilgrims, or Puritans, if you will, more followed and established, of course, the colony of Boston, which over a period of time would continue to grow and would absorb Plymouth. One of the things that the our Puritan ancestors did that settled in Massachusetts was establish a number of learned institutions. One was Harvard, named after its founder, John Harvard, in Cambridge, Mass., what is now Cambridge. But they also founded Dartmouth, way up in the wilds of New Hampshire. And the reason for that was that they wanted to convert the Native Americans to a Puritan way of life. And so they decided that they were going to educate these poor people. And consequently, they established a college in New Hampshire, Hanover, New Hampshire, named Dartmouth. And of course, that was the foundation, the beginning of Dartmouth University, which is one of the Ivy League schools that now exist in the northeastern part of the United States. Well, there are a lot of stories coming out of our first Thanksgiving, and one that stands out, and I wish I could remember the whole thing, but it's called The Courtship of Miles Standish. Well, Miles Standish himself probably wasn't a Puritan, but he was what you would call a mercenary. He was an old soldier. And he came aboard the Mayflower primarily as a means of protection, because our Pilgrim Fathers and their families weren't quite sure what they're going to run into in this country. So they wanted a little protection. So they hired this old soldier by the name of Miles Standish to sort of be their defender or their guardian or whatever you want to call it. And he landed with them. And how much protection he did, I don't know. But there's a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who's one of the great poets of our era, not our era, but that particular part of the country. And he wrote a thing called The Courtship of Miles Standish. And the story is that Miles Standish had a crush on a young lady, but he didn't know how to say the right words. He didn't know how to woo her with lovely words and all that sort of thing. And, you know, a lot of us today might have a little trouble with that. So he recruited another young man by the name of John Alden. And he hired John to speak to Priscilla on his behalf. And, of course, young John Alden did. And as he talked to her and so forth, and he always said that he was speaking for the old soldier, Miles Standish. Well, Priscilla wasn't really interested in the old soldier, but she was interested in young John Alden. So finally she got tired of him speaking for somebody else, and she said, "John Alden, why don't you speak for yourself?" And of course he did, and the story goes that John and Priscilla were married, had a family, and so forth. So all's well that ends well. It's an old poem, and I wish I could remember the finish line of it. But it's, you know, over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. The horse knows the way as he carries the sleigh over the glistening snow. And there's another line to it that I can't remember. But this year, things are going to be a little bit different. Not only are we celebrating the 400th anniversary of the landing of the Pilgrim Fathers, but we're also going through a pandemic in this country, COVID-19. Thanksgiving has always been a traditional family celebration. Families get together. You have a celebration of one sort or another. Usually things are peaceful. Other times there might be one hell of a fight or something like that. But this year that is being discouraged, mainly because this COVID-19 is spreading through this country like wildfire. It even come here to Rutland. Vermont, which was leading the nation at one time and keeping the thing under control, it's almost as though the lid is blown off. With the number of cases up in Washington County, Chittenden County, they've increased. Rutland County, they're really on the rise, especially at the nursing home up on Nichols Street. And we've had at least 2 deaths from the COVID-19 that has spread through that particular nursing home. Well, one of the things you're going to look at this Thanksgiving, you say, what do we have to be thankful for? We have a country which is really, really struggling right now. We've had people been burned out of their homes out on the West Coast and up through the Rocky Mountain area. Forest fires have chewed up thousands of homes. People have lost all their worldly possessions, lost loved ones. We come back into the southeastern part of our country, central part. We've had hurricanes and tornadoes. Again, people have lost their homes and lost loved ones. You have flooding, southeastern part of this country. It's hard to believe that about 10 years ago, the southeastern part of this country was going through a terrible drought. And the question was, was there going to be enough water to supply some of your larger cities down there, like Atlanta? The reservoir was going dry. And of course, now they've got all the water they can handle, whereas out on the West Coast, you'd give anything to have some of that water and some of that storm water. Through the Midwest, we've seen tornadoes. And the way people have suffered out there, and the farmers have suffered. We had drought. We've got an ongoing drought, which is of deep concern to a number of the farmers in our central part of the country. And our federal leadership right now is virtually non-existent. We have a Congress that can't get together to do what they should do, because you've got a few blockheads in there that are more concerned with themselves than they are with the public that they're supposed to be serving. You got a president who's a total idiot. When he should be leading, what's he doing? He's out playing golf. His stooges are running a number of lawsuits around the country trying to overturn election results. What does old stupid do? He goes and plays golf. He won't come out and meet the press. He keeps claiming he's won the election. Everybody with a brain in their head knows he's lost, that he's done, he's finished. But he won't admit it. Unfortunately, he's still got 2 more months, or a little under 2 more months, as President of the United States. And it's sort of been reported that he's looking for different things to try to make things tough on his successor. First of all, refusing to cooperate with the new administration, smoothing things out, and making a transfer of power as smooth as possible. Well, Dum Dum doesn't want to do that, and he's directed all of his minions not to cooperate with the new Biden administration. So, for a smooth transfer of power, It's going to be a little bit rough. But President-elect Biden is putting together a team that has had a lot of experience in government, so it won't be that bad. They've only been out 4 years. So it's just a matter of going back in, reacquainting themselves with their old jobs. And I think the transition will go smoothly, despite Dum Dum's opposition to it, and is doing his best to disrupt it. Well, we look around at the world situation, it's pretty much the same all over the world. Here in this country, we've had, over 235,000 people dying from this coronavirus since March. And hopefully there's a vaccine underway, but how long before people will be able to get it? Well, going to be a long, long time. First of all, it's got to be proven to be accurate. It's got to be certified. And the first people that are going to get it, and rightly so, should be those that are working on the front line, our doctors and our nurses and our health aides, people that are working on our ambulance crews, our police officers, our firemen, should be the first ones that this new inoculation should be available to. And of course, the number of senior citizens. But we look around and we see this and we say, well, what do we have to be thankful for? Well, number one, be thankful you're still alive. And if you haven't come down with the coronavirus yet, use common sense, wear a mask, and don't congregate in large groups. I think we've seen the spurt, or the spike, I should say, in this increase. Well, a lot of it had to do with a lot of political rallies. You begin, first of all, with the kids getting back to college. And they'd been quarantined at home with mom and dad for 2 or 3, 4 months, and all of a sudden you get back with your old buddies, your old friends. What do you want to do? You don't want to go sit in your room. You get out and you celebrate. And that's what they were doing, very, very carelessly, and bingo. All of a sudden, this coronavirus, all of a sudden it gets another spurt, another shot of life. Political rallies. You have to look at the mass rallies that Trump had. His Secret Service detail, most of them tested positive. You look at all his staff at the White House, all of them that have tested positive, including now his son there, Don Jr., who's as dumb as the old man, has tested positive. And it goes on and on. Is this going to wipe us out? Well, you kind of look at it and say, well, you look at all the people that are sick, and the numbers that get affected every day are huge. Across this country, across Europe, Africa, that we don't have any reports on, but it's got to be booming there too. Also in Asia, right here, and the reports that we have from Vermont. It is spreading because people get careless. And yet, there are still some people that are buying into the Trump myth that this is a hoax. You look at the figures. People that are sick, look at the hospitals that are overcrowded. Some cases they can't take any patients. And how can you look at all this and say, hey, this is a hoax? Some people are stupid enough that they won't wear masks. Some parts of the country, some of, well, I don't know what to call them, Trump's idiots, are rallying against government regulations that are saying, hey, you've got to close our nightclubs at 10. You've got to quarantine in your homes. We're going to have a curfew. They can't get it through their heads that this is to try and curb a pandemic that is sweeping through the country. You don't have to be a genius to know that there's no hoax about this current disease. All you have to do is look at the figures. Now, can we slow it down? Well, the doctors that know say yes. It can be slowed down, but it's going to take a while. We're going to have a vaccine, but that's going to be a while. So what do you do right now? Right now, you wear a face mask when you're out in public. You wash your hands. You stay out of large groups. You do social distancing. Well, means you're not going to have the Christmas parties this year. Better to forego a Christmas party than to wind up in the morgue. There won't be any New Year's Eve big celebration this year. At least there won't be if anybody's got any common sense. People are going to be disappointed. It's the way it goes. This past weekend, 18 college football games were canceled because a number of the players had tested positive for COVID-19. So we look around and we say, well, what are we going to be thankful for? Well, hope is on the way. One thing, we'd be thankful that we're still alive. Number two, we'd be thankful that we live in the United States of America, and particularly up here, that we're living in the beautiful state of Vermont. We're thankful that the country came to its senses on November 3rd and brought in responsible leadership, which will take office on the 20th of January, and got rid of the bunch of clowns that are in there now. There's one more clown to be eliminated, and that's in the Senate. Mitch McConnell. And hopefully, special elections in Georgia on the 5th of January, when they're going to be voting for 2 senators. Hopefully that election will go to the right way. It'll throw the Senate into a 50-50 tie, which means that the new Vice President, Kamala Harris, will cast the tie-breaking vote. And hopefully, with a Democratic-controlled House and a Senate where the Democrats have that one-vote majority, we'll be able to get together and get some of these programs going that are going to relieve people. A number of the bills that Congress has passed and they aren't acting on now in their lame duck session, all the folks that are unable to pay their rent. Before Christmas, they could be evicted. You have the largest turnout of people on the street probably in the history of this country. If every landlord says, well, you haven't paid your rent, now hit the road. Going to be trouble there, a lot of trouble. People can't be out in the street. Children can't be put out in the street. Said, well, tough luck. You haven't got a roof over your head, you haven't got a bed to sleep in. You haven't got any place to call home, the security of home. And yet Congress refuses to act. There's money which is passed through the House. They could go to programs to alleviate that possibility. But it's blocked in the Senate by a knucklehead from Kentucky by the name of Mitch McConnell. He's as big a blockhead as Donald Trump, except he's a little bit smarter. Nobody's dumber than Trump. So you got to give McConnell some credit. But we're also going to make history. Joe Biden, on one end of the spectrum, was the youngest senator from the state of Delaware. He was from the state of Delaware. He was the youngest person ever elected to serve in the U.S. Senate. Now coming the other way, at age 78, he'll be the oldest man ever to take office for the first time as President of the United States. But he made a wise decision in picking a running mate, and that was Kamala Harris. She made history that way. She continues to make history. She'd be the first female vice president. She'd be the first woman of color to serve as vice president. And in 2024, she'll become the first woman to become president of the United States, because Joe Biden will be 82, and you can't do the things in your 80s that you do in your 70s and your 60s. And I think he's going to be a one-term president. His goal is, number one, pull the country back together again. Get this virus under control. Spruce up the economy by making the government probably the employer of last resort. You probably revert back to many of the programs that Franklin Roosevelt had in the 1930s in combating the Depression then. Because with the economy going right now, we're going to have one heck of a depression coming up unless the government acts. And I believe under President Biden, Vice President Harris, and the House of Representatives, government will act in a positive way. The bloc, again, depends on who controls the Senate. And if Sad Horse's asked from Kentucky, it's going to be tough getting many of these programs through that would relieve the suffering of so many thousands of Americans. But this is going to be an unusual Thanksgiving. When we look around, the suffering, the turmoil, but there is a thing to be thankful for. That is, that we're returning democracy to the United States of America, that we live in this country, that we live in Vermont, and that there is hope. One of the big things we're going to be facing in future years is the education of our children. Kids aren't learning at any level. You can't bring them in a classroom, say, for 2 days, 3 days a week, and then they're out for 6 to 8 weeks. Look at the situation in Burlington. Kids at Burlington High School haven't started the school year yet. They've taken some of the call them middle school or junior high school students, and they've started working them in some of the buildings that they have. But Burlington High School is going to be located in a former store in downtown Burlington. But that has to be, a lot of work has to be done on it. They probably won't begin their school year until the end of January. And what are you going to do? Are they going to go to school during the summer? Well, probably going to have to make up the time lost. So we go into the holidays, and we're looking at a situation. Well, let's talk about the ski industry here in Vermont. This year there won't be any women's world championship held at Killington, because most of those have been canceled, and people are saying, well, there's hope for next year. For example, the World Olympics, which were supposed to be held this year in Tokyo, they're scheduled for 2021. Hopefully, we'll have the virus under control, and the Olympics can take place in Tokyo, Japan. But, you know, the situation we've got, for a lot of us, going to be at home. I know in my case, I'll be home with my dog for Thanksgiving. Not unusual. And a lot of people are going to be alone. But even though we're making a sacrifice, people all through history have made sacrifices. Our men and women that serve in our armed forces making a sacrifice, not being home for the holidays. Creates a very, very lonely feeling. Many of our public servants that have to work on that day. All of our health personnel that are still going to be right out straight. There won't be any holiday for them. They're going to be right out straight. So as we approach Thanksgiving, let's make the best of it as we can. Have a happy holiday, if that's possible, and it will be. May Almighty God of wisdom continue to bless these United States. God love you. Have a great week.